All right. I'm going to read the final part of the 57 bus. This chapter is called Risky Thinking. Let me ask you, Rick Lindsay said, do you have risky thoughts going on throughout your day? Lindsay, a parole agent at Chad, was addressing Richard and a half dozen other young men in a small meeting room inside Chad's Feather Hall, the living quarters for the facility's lowest risk, best behaving youths. It was late afternoon. The young inmates had completed school and work for the day. Now they had just one more obligation before dinner. Counterpoint, a cognitive behavioral program designed to teach problem solving and perspective taking. Fear of getting in trouble, offered a young man in a white t-shirt. He tipped his chair back against the whiteboard behind him. The room, bare except for an easel, wasn't much larger than a walk-in closet. Richard sat quietly, elbows on his knees, listening. What would get you in trouble, though? Lindsay asked. He was a genial fireplug of a man who spoke informally like someone from the neighborhood. Like behavior? What kind of behavior gets you in trouble? Anger? What makes you angry? Rage? What makes you rageful? Come on. Disrespect? When you feel disrespected, how does that make you feel? It hurts. It hurts? What does it make you want to think? My feelings be like wanting me to react, the young man said. Justification, offered another youth. He had short hair, and his confident manner signaled that he'd been around a while. Why would that go to risky thinking? Most people don't think before they act, the youth with glasses explained. I think, but with that thinking, I still try to justify what I'm going to do. I'm a little stubborn with my thinking. Lindsay nodded as if to say, now we're getting there. Risky thinking, he said. All of you are here for a reason, right? I'm not going to say that all of you are here because of some risky thoughts you had. Maybe I shouldn't have went to the store that night. Maybe I shouldn't have jacked that guy that night. Maybe I shouldn't have had a fight with that guy that night, right? Maybe I shouldn't have had that pistol on me that night, right? Just saying. Or is it because you didn't think about it? Another kid suggested. He wore a black windbreaker and had a sardonic edge to him. It could be, Lindsay agreed. Other guys be under the influence. Not being fully aware of your surroundings can be risky thinking because you're not in your right state of mind. How do you know it's a risky thought? Doubt, said a youth with hair that was pulled back in a ponytail. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees, his eyes on Lindsay. Doubt, Lindsay repeated. Explain. When your conscience tells you it's bad, you know you ain't supposed to do it. Your conscience, Lindsay said. That little angel and that little devil? And you listen to the bad one, the ponytailed kid said. The good one is the one you're supposed to listen to. The good one is the one that's you. The good one is giving you that gut feeling, offered the kid with the black-framed glasses. He's saying, you sure that's the right thing to do? Lindsay agreed. So, you got a good dude and a bad dude. Which one are you going to listen to? I think I got two bad dudes, said the boy in the black windbreaker. He grinned. Lindsay laughed. It's different for everybody. He handed out a sheet of paper listing different kinds of risky thinking. Overgeneralizing? What's that? You always blame it on me, the kid with the glasses said, playing the role of an overgeneralizer. Staff's always trying to get me. You always give me negative checks. Lindsay nodded. There you go. He ran through some other categories. Catastrophizing. That was one kid's grandma. Always saw the worst that was going to happen. Desperate and deserving? You're like, I need this or I have to have this, somebody offered. Lindsay said. Sort of entitlement, someone else suggested. Man, why can't I ever have this? Lindsay's raised his eyebrows, asking for more. Ain't I a good person? Don't I deserve to have this? Man, I've been working this job for 5 years. I still don't have this? A discussion ensued. Was desperate and deserving just a way that poor people thought? Rich people can't be desperate and deserving. What are you talking about? The kid scoffed. They can be hella rich and they can be like, I deserve to have a wife. And you start to feel hella bad for yourself, the ponytailed kid said. Like some people got so much money, but they don't have nobody. Yeah, but I'd rather be them than be here, the sardonic kid said. He folded his arms across his chest. Everybody nodded. Progress report. Sasha stood in the hallway outside Department 11, wearing a vest, button-up shirt, and bow tie paired with a long skirt and ballet flats. Over their shoulder, they had slung a canvas purse decorated with pins. LGBTQ class of 2018, read 1. Another said simply, they, them, there. They'd cut their hair short and shaved it on one side. The ends were dyed fluorescent pink. Debbie and Carl stood beside Sasha. They too were dressed in their courtroom best, a purple jersey dress for Debbie, pleated slacks, a pink checkered shirt, and a tie for Carl. Carl had topped his outfit with his Outback hat, the same one he'd used to cover Sasha the day Sasha was burned. It was the last Friday in June 2015. The family had come to court for Richard's second progress report, the one that would determine whether he was eligible for sentencing. Richard had passed the first hurdle with flying colors. He'd had no disciplinary violations, and the staff at Chad had described him as motivated to participate in treatment programs and remorseful about his crime. If his second progress report was equally positive, he could be resentenced to 5 years instead of 7. The elevator opened and Jasmine stepped out, wearing jeans and high tops and a black and white shawl-colored collared jacket. She hugged all 3 members of Sasha's family and took a seat, exhaling sharply. The strain was gone from her face, and she was smiling, but she was tired too, having recently taken on a second job. After completing her shift at the convalescent home, she now worked a 4-hour shift at the supermarket, often not getting off work until 1 a.m. Every Sunday, she drove 3 hours round trip to visit Richard. Getting the time off to come to court hadn't been easy. Her boss had turned down her request, but she had managed to quietly trade shifts with a coworker. Now there was another problem. Richard's court file had somehow been misplaced, which meant that the court couldn't review the record. The case would have to be continued until the following week. Jasmine's shoulders slumped. I can't get more time off, she whispered. She kept talking for a moment, but then her voice trailed off. I'm smiling, but I'm crying inside, she admitted. She was cycling through the options in her mind. How could she get there? Who else could come? The case file mishap wasn't just a problem for Jasmine. Sasha's family wanted to address the court, but they were leaving for vacation the next day. They wouldn't be around next week. After some discussion, Judge DeLucci agreed to let them make their statement. He beckoned Carl to the front of the room. The parties now stood before the judge like a couple standing before the altar. Carl with Deputy District Attorney Scott Ford at his side, Richard with Bill Dubois. In the year and a half since it all began, Richard had grown taller than Dubois, his shoulders broader. He watched Carl, his expression neutral. Carl cleared his throat and unfolded a piece of paper. I am speaking on behalf of my wife, Debbie, and our child, Sasha. Thank you for the opportunity to have our voices heard, he began. The courtroom fell silent. In the week following the fire on the bus, Richard wrote 2 letters to Sasha in which he took full responsibility for his actions and asked for forgiveness. Unfortunately, it took 14 months for those letters to reach us. When we finally read them, we were moved to tears. The letters gave us a clearer picture of who Richard is, and we wished we had been able to see them before Debbie spoke at the sentencing hearing. As he listened, Richard's jaw worked, the muscles tensing and relaxing, his lips pulled to one side. I believe Richard when he says he meant no bodily harm to Sasha, Carl continued. But I also believe that Sasha would not have been a target if Sasha had been wearing jeans. He described how other kids on the bus had laughed, even as Sasha's clothes went up in flames. We wish for Richard and those other kids to learn empathy toward those who are different. We hope that there are programs in juvenile detention that can at least help Richard with this, and that he can become an ally who will stand up against the bullying and hatred of gay and trans people. It was so quiet in the courtroom that you could hear the flutter of Carl's breath as he tried to steady his voice. From the start, we've been opposed to Richard's being tried as an adult, he said. His actions appear to have been impulsive, immature, and unpremeditated. He did make a big mistake and recognizes that. He asked for our forgiveness. Carl's voice broke. Sasha, Debbie, and I have forgiven Richard, he whispered. We hope the state will focus more on preparing him for the world beyond incarceration rather than on punishing him. When Carl raised his eyes from the paper clenched in his hands, he saw Richard watching him. Thank you, Richard mouthed. At the back of the courtroom, the ladies were red-eyed and sniffling. Given that the sentence allows the court a pretty fair amount of discretion, I do not take your words lightly, Judge DeLucci said. Then he continued the case to the following Tuesday. A level of maturity. The record should reflect that the court has read the fairly voluminous records that have been provided, Judge DeLucci said when Richard returned to court the next week. It was a positive report, the judge noted. Richard was attending school, participating in treatment, and had expressed interest in getting a job at the facility. He hadn't had any disciplinary actions. The staff noted that he was reserved and quiet and tended to keep to himself, but they commended him for limiting his interaction so that he is not drawn into too much negativity. All in all, DeLucci told Richard, the reports indicated a level of maturity that you didn't exhibit on the day of the offense. In addition, he continued, Sasha's family has made it clear what their position is, and that should be considered. With that, he modified Richard's sentence from 7 years to 5 years. With credit for time served, he could be out just before his 21st birthday. It was his recommendation that Richard serve the totality of that time in the juvenile system. Jasmine's boss had given her the day off to attend the hearing. When it was over, she stood smiling in the hallway, looking slightly dazed. It's still a long time, she said. 3 years. She had spent the weekend with her cousin Regis, attending the San Francisco LGBTQ Pride Parade. Now she was planning to take advantage of the rare day off and do some errands. First on the list, wash her car. It's such a relief, she said in the elevator. She leaned her head back against the wall and raised her eyes to the ceiling before correcting herself. Relief. Andrew and the binary. 5 months after Richard was sentenced, Andrew and Sasha got together for dinner at a Latin American cafe in Berkeley. They hadn't seen each other much over the previous years, but now Sasha was in town for winter break, and they were getting together for the second time in as many weeks. They'd already had that initial, what are you up to these days, conversation, and over dinner they just talked the way they used to, about the world and what it was and what it should be. They talked about revolution versus reform and anarchism versus socialism, and Andrew was struck, as he always had been, by the way Sasha carefully considered things instead of just echoing the opinions of other people. Andrew was 18 now. His glasses were rimless at the bottom, his nose pierced at the septum. He identified as a gay man. Few people knew his trans status. He kept it on the down low. Yet when straight men treated him like a bro, he felt a familiar sense of disorientation. For how vehemently I felt like I wasn't a girl, I have to say, being a boy isn't super great either, he admitted. Both sides have such a bull baggage attached to them. If being a man meant always having to act confident and never being able to admit feelings, sadness, or self-doubt, it was just as much of a trap as being a woman was. He was happier now than he'd been before he transitioned, but he still yearned for something else, some place outside of gender. Actually, he said, I'm starting to identify a little bit as, I don't even know the word I want to use yet. I like androgynous. I like genderqueer. What held him back? Fear. Fear of other people's judgments, their questions, their hostility, their fascination. Because I fall neatly within the binary, I feel comfortable right now, he explained. But if I were to radically shift my appearance in a way that was more androgynous, I don't know how comfortable that would be for me. I mean, I've already been asked enough questions about my genitals. I'm just about done with that. Birthdays. Richard turned 18 in Alameda County Juvenile Hall, just before being transferred back to Chad. Individual birthdays aren't celebrated in Juvenile Hall, so it was a day exactly like any other. Richard was used to that by now. He hadn't spent a birthday at home since he turned 14. His 15th, 16th, 17th, and now 18th birthdays had all been spent locked up. Back at Chad, Richard earned his high school diploma and then began taking vocational classes, earning certificates in programs like irrigation design and forklift driving. He worked in the barber shop for a while, then got a job working for Free Venture, an environmentally certified nonprofit that refurbishes and recycles e-waste on site. At Free Venture, he earned $9.70 an hour, which allowed him to start paying off the $2,100 fine he'd been a part of, that was part of his plea bargain, and also deposit money into a savings account for his eventual release. It was one of the best jobs at the facility and one of the hardest to get, but Richard was doing exceptionally well. He had already attained incentive level A, the highest incentive level a young inmate could achieve, and he was housed among other low-risk youths in a hall where the atmosphere was generally relaxed. In the evenings, kids watched TV or played ping pong and dominoes in the day room, or settled in to make phone calls at one of the two payphones. Richard held himself a bit aloof, slow to trust, slow to warm. He didn't smile much. Each night he returned to a 6 by 8 foot cell with a metal sink and toilet. On his desk he kept a Bible, some folded paper crafts, and a television he'd purchased with money he'd earned at Free Venture. Neat rows of family snapshots were taped to the wall, all the people he loved the most, bright-eyed, grinning, frozen in time. He slept in the lower berth of a metal bunk bed. The top berth had no mattress, and he used it to display the vocational and educational certificates he'd earned at Chad, the squares of colored paper arranged in orderly lines. Beside them, he placed a printout of the poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. He had another 2 birthdays still to celebrate behind bars, his 19th and his 20th. Sometime before his 21st, a Crown Victoria cage car would take him back to Alameda County Juvenile Hall, where he would be processed and then released. After that, he would finally complete the journey home he began on the afternoon of November 4th, 2013. After that, the next chapter of his life would finally begin. 1001 No Longer Blank White Cards. In January 2016, just before going back to school for their sophomore year of college, Sasha and Michael got together at Maybach to play the index card game. The game was still fun, the in-jokes still funny, even if some of the references had been lost in the mists of time. Sasha could still effortlessly layer a lisp over a Russian accent when the cards required it. Michael still wore a gray beanie, which was good because there was still a card that said, "Steal Michael's beanie." "Have you ever heard of a little word called they?" Sasha remarked after pulling Lunesta sleeping pills, a card that used he-she pronouns. Player must play with his/her forehead on the table. It was an old line, one that dated from when Sasha was first trying to get people to remember gender-neutral pronouns. Except now it was a joke instead of a reminder. Nobody needed reminding except the card, which had been written before Sasha was Sasha. A couple of days earlier, Michael and Sasha had digitally scanned the full stack of index cards for posterity. As they went through the deck, they paused over the ones that mentioned someone named Luke. One featured a drawing of a pen and a bottle of ink. Luke's fountain pen, it said. Draw a card. It was kind of a weak pun, not nearly as good as many of the cards that came later, but after talking it over, the two decided to leave the Luke cards in the deck. After all, Sasha said, they were part of the historical record. A lot had changed since the beginning of high school, including Sasha's name, pronouns, and style of dress. But in all the important ways, Sasha was still Sasha. They still loved cats, cartoons, games, and hats, and they were still, as they'd once written on their blog, the biggest bus nerd you will ever meet. Now that love of buses had become an academic focus. They had decided to major in urban planning and hoped to eventually get a job designing or improving public transit systems. I might take public transit even if I wasn't in love with it, Sasha explained. But the reason I'm studying it is because I have this personal love for it. That love, well, you could ask Sasha to explain it, but you'd be wasting your time. They could no more explain loving buses than they could explain loving the color purple. I'm an autistic kid with a special interest, Sasha said and smiled. That's probably the best answer I can give. And that's the end of the 57 bus. There are some milestones that you can read about at the end of the book, but I won't go into all of those. And some information about juvenile incarceration and the costs and the effect of it. And then, of course, the acknowledgments. But that's the 57 bus. Thanks for listening.